Over the past few months, I've talked a lot about our annual crops as I've planted for spring and summer. But we're also growing over 30 edible perennials in the garden, and we try to plant at least one new perennial every year. Today I thought I'd show you the perennial fruit crops that we're growing in the 1 Yard Revolution garden. One of the great things about growing perennials is that they produce crops year after year with very little effort from us. And as we plant more and more perennials, we get larger yields relative to the amount of work that we have to put into them. And that's certainly true of this Red Haven peach tree, which we planted as a bare root 2 springs ago. We had our first small harvest last summer, but this year the tree is loaded and we'll have a much larger harvest. And again, we don't have to do a whole lot of work to enjoy these peaches. We do have to prune the tree annually. We keep the ground covered with wood chips. And now that the tree is established, because we get a good amount of rain here, we don't even have to water the tree. We're really looking forward to our peach harvest this year, and I'll make sure to share it with you in a video. Now let's take a look at our blueberries. We planted 3 blueberry plants here in this raised bed in 2014. It took a couple years to get a decent harvest, but now these plants are absolutely loaded, and we look forward to our best harvest ever from these plants. Our blueberries do require a little bit more upkeep than our other fruit plants. Yes, we mulch them and we prune them, but they prefer acidic soil, and our soil is slightly alkaline, so we apply elemental sulfur every year. And because they're in a raised bed, the soil tends to dry out more quickly, and we do have to water these plants occasionally. And because we like to make the most of our limited growing space, we're also growing strawberries underneath the blueberries. These are June-bearing strawberries. They get plenty of sun early in the season, and we've been enjoying berries from these plants all June, and there's still some left to harvest. We'll start harvesting the blueberries a few weeks from now, and before they ripen, we'll cover them with bird netting because birds really love to eat them. And though we don't mind sharing, we do want to have some for ourselves as well. Now let's check out our Asian pear tree, which we planted as a bare root in the spring of 2013. We had our first small harvest last year, and this year we should have a really nice harvest. Though our blueberries do require a little bit of extra care, our Asian pears don't. We just prune them and keep the ground covered with wood chips. We don't have to fertilize or water. And with that minimal investment, we'll have years of delicious Asian pears, which we harvest fresh from the tree. And once again, to make the best use of our space, we have June-bearing strawberries growing in the understory of the pear tree. Strawberries make a great ground cover under trees and low traffic areas, so we try to plant them anywhere we can to get much higher strawberry yields without taking up much space in the garden. Now let's move on to our honeyberries, which are also known as Haskaps. Now we have 2 varieties of honeyberries planted here, and that's needed for cross-pollination. They produce a fruit that's very small and similar to a cross between a blueberry and a grape. One of the reasons we were so excited to plant these honeyberries was that they produce fruit very early in the season, May for us, which is earlier than any other crop. But the downside is they produce such a small yield relative to the amount of space they take up, and they also cast quite a bit of shade. So we're actually thinking about replacing our honeyberries with a fruit tree that will take up less space and give us higher yields. And we'll be pruning these plants back quite a bit soon to give other plants in the area more sun and to make more space. And again, probably next spring we'll put a fruit tree here instead. Okay, here along the fence line we have last year's 2 additions to our food forest. We have a Pixwell gooseberry and a heritage raspberry. We have to wait another 2 years before our first gooseberry harvest, and that will actually be something new for us. We've never tried them before, but that shouldn't be an issue because my wife and I like every fruit and every vegetable, and I'm sure we'll enjoy these as well. And we should get our first heritage raspberry harvest, though a small one, this summer. Now let's take a look at the perennial fruit we've had in the garden, I think longer than anything else. I don't even remember how long we've had our blackberries, but it's certainly been over 20 years. My wife planted these way back when we first moved into our house, and along with one other perennial, it's probably the oldest plant that we have. Now these blackberries produce like crazy, and they're in an area that I think is about 7 by 6 feet, and they produce enough blackberries for us to last us the whole year. And we eat them fresh, we freeze them, we make pies, cobblers, ice cream. These plants produce so many berries that we have a really hard time even keeping up with the harvest in summertime. And all we have to do for all those berries is to prune canes that come up outside of this area where we're confining them. And we have to remove second-year canes after they're done producing. We also prune back the height a bit, though we let these get pretty tall to get more sun because this is a shady spot. Okay, next we have more strawberries as well as the other perennial that may have been here as long as the blackberries. Okay, over here in this small raised bed, we have Elan and Tristar strawberries, and they produce from basically early June through October. And we've been enjoying these strawberries all June, and they're getting a little thin right now, but we still have some to pick today. Strawberries are a great crop for new beginners to grow when they're thinking about starting to grow perennials, because most people love them. They're easy to grow, they grow in a wide variety of climates, and they spread like crazy. Especially June-bearing strawberries will spread by sending out runners, so you should never run out of plants. And that brings us to the final leg of today's tour. Up here to my right we have Niagara Grapes, which are the perennial I mentioned earlier that we may have had as long as our blackberries, certainly well over 20 years. And it's something my wife planted, and they produce excellent harvests for us in late summer and early fall. Also along this fence line we have two berries that we love and we've had a long time, yellow raspberries and black raspberries. The yellow raspberries produce late into the season, which is very nice. Well after we're done harvesting blackberries and black raspberries, we have our yellow raspberries to enjoy. So once again, we like to add at least one new edible perennial to the garden every year. And over time that brings us closer and closer to the ideal of a food forest that's self-sustaining and produces food for us with very little effort. And for you beginners out there, I definitely recommend growing at least some perennials. They're a great investment in the future. They'll give you returns year after year after year. Strawberries, like I said earlier, are a great choice. I hope you enjoyed this quick look at all the perennial fruit crops that we're growing in the garden. I'll be back soon with another tour showing you everything else that we're growing. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. But I better get out of the way so this guy back here can do his thing. Come on, Oscar.